So how would you fancy an intimate evening with myself and Niall, where we're going to be chatting all about talking with criminals and you're going to ask us some questions? We'll be performing our brand new show, Look Who's Talking, live in Kilkenny this weekend on Saturday the 17th of May at the Pembroke Hotel at 8 o'clock. Very limited tickets are available on www.kilkennylawfestival.com. So we kind of have two scenes that are sort of being played out in the courtroom today in the trial of Richard Satchwell for the murder of his wife, Tina. And we've got to the point, Eamon, that the police and forensics teams have got to a place that they believe there's a body under the stairwell in their home in Youghal. Richard Satchwell has been questioned, has stuck to his original story that his wife has gone missing. He's been released from custody, but he is then rearrested because they make what they believe to be the discovery of a body.
Yeah, so we actually heard this yesterday where the builders had been in and the forensic search team and they've been in this under the stairs at the cubbyhole to remove some of the concrete. And they dug down, about a foot or so, and they found black plastic sheeting, and it looked like part of a human hand or fingers. And at which point the crime scene was shut down to await the arrival of the forensic archaeologists.
Yeah.
This is on the evening of the 10th, on the 11th of October. He was arrested initially on the 10th. He was let go on the 11th. So a couple of hours later, this discovery is made. And then basically the superintendent goes back to the district court and looks for a rearrest warrant. So we heard this in evidence today that they wanted a rearrest warrant because they had new information that come to light that they didn't have when they had previously arrested him for the murder of Tina Satchwell. So now they found
and this is all happening in October 2023, 6.5 years after she's gone missing. And all that time he has lived in that house and has stuck to the story that she left him, basically. They were sort of rowing. There was various things that were put out and that the jury have heard that there might have been another man, that they were, that she wanted to go to England and that she took this money, which doesn't appear to have existed. So he has stuck to that and lived in that home.
Yeah, so he's exactly, and that's where he was arrested on the 10th, and then of course he spends the night of the 11th after his release in a hotel room with his new mobile phone so that the guards can contact him if they need him. And on just after midday, then on the 12th, he is rearrested. They execute this warrant, and again it starts off with the usual caution, and it's been explained to him why he's been arrested. And we're played this video, and the jury can see it, and. Like in the first video, he sat with his arms crossed. This is on the 10th and, kind of leaning back in the chair. And this time he's leaning forward and his hands are down between his knees, clasped between his knees. So the body language has changed. And he's told, is there anything you want to tell me today in as much detail as possible? This is the Detective Noonan, who's the expert in interviewer. And he's back in with Satchwell again. And he tells him, look, I'm just here. I want you to know I'm here to listen. So they've built up this rapport. Throughout the whole thing, Richard refers to him as David. And I think at one point he even says, when the police rang him, he kind of knew what it was going to be about. And he says, I wish it had been your number. So, he's obviously built up a rapport with their main suspect. And again, he's there and he starts telling the same story again. On the Sunday, we're at the car boot sale and we're coming home, and then suddenly she hit me. Okay. And it sends his glasses flying, and he says then they go home and it was like it was all normal again. And he goes through the explanation of talking about getting the pizzas, eating the pizzas, running the bath for her. And then, the whole bedtime routine of giving her a massage and all the rest of it. And so he describes it as being pretty much a normal evening. But then he said, I always knew it was going to be one of those days when she could be nice or nasty, because it was the anniversary of her grandmother's passing away the following day, which is the 20th of March. So he goes through about getting up the next morning. He'd been out in the shed doing a bit of plumbing. He was wearing his old dirty clothes, and he knew she was up because the dogs had come in. Now, as he gets into this, it's very difficult to hear in the court what he's actually saying, because he starts breaking down and he's actually sobbing. And he said, she just flew at me. I went backwards over the floor. I don't know what happened. I kept holding her up. It all stopped. So this is the snatches that we're hearing. Now, the jury were given a transcript of this interview.
Okay.
And the judge himself said, look, it was hard to hear. And he looked for a transcript himself. And unfortunately, we don't get one.
But this is the moment he's kind of said that, yeah, I killed her. He's not admitting to murder. Obviously, he's pleaded not guilty to murder in this case. But he's saying, you know, she came at me and we had this altercation. Do you know what the timeline is at this point? Are they still at the crime scene waiting for this excavation to happen? Do they still only have what they believe to be a hand of human remains? And
yeah, so at this stage, we know that the excavation of the cubbyhole in the house is progressing quite rapidly, because there was evidence today from Laureen Buckley, who's the forensic specialist. She's the anthropologist, that's a bone specialist, and she's asked to explain exactly, you know, her area of expertise. And herself and Margaret Bolster, the assistant state pathologist, are at the scene, and they've gone in to help the two archaeologists. And so they're kind of taking it in turns to excavate. So things are speeding up.
Right.
So this interview, like the arrest starts at 2. Like the arrest was at
midday.
It was just after midday, 9 minutes past midday. And we know that the body is removed from the excavation site at 2:40.
Right.
So it's probably around the same time. So the interviewer, the Garda interviewer, might not necessarily know at this stage, you know, that a full body remains have been found, although it probably, materially, it doesn't really affect anything at this stage. So he initially goes through, Satchwell initially kind of goes through a very rushed new version of events for the first time, where he admits she came at him with a chisel, she flew at him, he fell backwards. And then, you know, there was something, you know, he was holding up the belt and then it all stopped and he realized she was still and he held her for a couple of minutes. The dogs kind of came over, were licking her body and were lying there beside her. And then, so he decided he had to go out and make things look as normal as possible. And he went to the post office to collect their dole money. And we saw the CCT of this with the two dogs. And then he heads off to Dungarvan because, again, he wanted to kind of keep up appearances. He wanted things, and this is a phrase he used, he wanted things to look normal. And often he said this is what he did as well, like when he was trying to hide the violence that he said he experienced at the hands of Tina Satchwell. Now, he said he couldn't stay away, and he said it might sound kind of strange. Now, this is the more drawn out version of the story, that he needed to go back to talk to her. And it's a kind of a recurring theme in this. But so after kind of the initial, I suppose, as you put it, the initial kind of admission of, you know, there's a different version of events, that there was a confrontation. Like the interviewer, Detective Noonan, then starts, you know, so okay, let's go back, you know, on the way back from the car boot sale, where exactly were you on the journey when you were hit? And he explains, you know, at some part near the N25. And he kind of shows how he's asked to show how, like, he was hit, and he uses one of his hands to kind of swipe across his face, and he says, my glasses went flying. But in the kind of the rushed version of events, then, like, he kind of goes through this, and then he talks about, you know, after going to Dungarvan, or on his way to Dungarvan, he said the reason he went into Grange Church was to light a candle for her. It wasn't really for Pearl and the grandmother's anniversary. And he said, like, I know it's odd, and when I got back, I sat there, you know, trying to think what I was going to do. He said, you know, he just remembered her face being distorted with anger, but she wasn't a bad woman. She was angry. And then he quickly, you know, talks about he buried her under the stairs. It had never been concreted over. So it was always just, as he put it, it was muck and stone that was there in this part under the stairs. And he went out to get her roses, because he always called them my Irish rose, but it was Mother's Day and there wasn't any roses. So he ended up putting tulips into the grave with her. And he says, I've got no excuses. So this was actually hard to hear, a lot of this. So this is a very kind of short and condensed version.
And did he not say, and in the opening case of the state was sort of his version of events, he put her in a freezer first?
Yeah, and we get to that now in the kind of the more the extended version of so that was kind of his synopsis.
Right.
So then the interviewer brings me right back to the beginning, which is where we were with tell us about the drive back from the
where exactly
boot sale and where you were hit. And then moving on from that, he gets through the whole, their evening routine, the whole lot. So like while he's talking to the Garda interviewer, he goes off on tangents, like, talking about kind of the background and the relationship. Like he's been asked specific questions like, well, what did you do next? Did you, when you got up, what clothes did you put on? And he'll go off on tangents, and he'll talk about like, he just, it was odd, and he used to think, was it all about me? Am I not good enough for her? And he says, in reality, he was telling the interviewer this, in reality, I think she misses Fermoy. And I think she wished that they'd never left Fermoy, and that they shouldn't have sold the house. And he said there was never tears until he says, I'm not a psychiatrist, but my opinion was that she was missing Fermoy, and she was missing the independence that he felt she seemed to have in that town, her hometown, I suppose. And there was stuff where he was talking about, taking lots of pictures on digital camera and playing them back on DVD, and it wasn't quite clear where he was going with that.
None of which he's asked about. He's not been asked about this. He's sort of rambling a little bit.
Yeah, and he's been asked to kind of explain like what happened next in terms of what in terms of
the Garda are looking for the nuts and bolts of what happened.
I mean, like, he goes into like about how he always, wakes up early, and he always did that since he was a young fella, and then talks about, picking up Heidi from the floor and placing her at the back of Tina's knees in bed. This is the morning before anything had happened. And he put on his old dirty clothes from Saturday, as he put it, old dirty jeans and T-shirts, because he was going out to do the washing machine. And then the Garda interviewer kind of, he's trying to remind him that detail is important. And he talks about putting this breakfast together with sliced apple and seedless mandarins and grapes and natural yogurt. And they had his coffee, and he went out, and the dogs came in wagging to the shed, which normally he said would mean that Tina was in the bathroom doing her bathroom routine, flossing her teeth. But she was actually at the bottom flight of the stairs with a wood chisel, and she was scraping away at the plasterboard, which she had in the house because he was doing work there. And he says he thinks he startled her. I don't know. I fell backwards when she came at me. I don't know why her belt her robe belt was loosed. I held her off me, and my arm's tired. And then he's asked,
was he showing how he did this? Because he ended up in this scenario with the rope of her dressing gown in his hands while she's coming at him with a chisel.
Yeah, and that happens in the interview. Like he talks about the officer Noonan, who's trying to interview him, is saying, look, can you freeze frame it? Can you kind of just freeze the frame and describe what she's looking at? And he talks about, it just happened so fast, and he just can't do the details. And he's kind of, what are you doing? He's flying back, and she flew straight for me. And he says that feeling of knowing you're falling flat on your back, and my attention was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was the chisel coming at me like this. And he makes a motion, you can see it on the video. And then the interviewer gets him to stand up from the chair and say, can you kind of demonstrate, where you were? And there's a bit of confusion, like, and they're kind of, was he in front of him or beside him? And eventually kind of it realizes that, like, he'd kind of walked up, she had her back to him. And again, he loses kind of traction on the details again. He said, it happened so fast, I can't put it into detail. Honest, I fell backwards on the floor. Tina was on top of me. My arms are up in the air. I was holding her back with the belt of the bathrobe. And then the guard lay on the floor at one stage to kind of say, look, is this how you were? And he has his arms up in the air. And at one point, like, he's showing, he has a belt, and he's saying, were you holding it like this? And he goes, indicates one way or the other. And then the officer asks him, can he give you the belt to show me? He goes, no, please don't. So he didn't want to demonstrate how he was holding the belt at that stage. And he was explaining, like, where was it? It was across her throat, over her head. And he was just explaining again, like, it was a stabbing motion, that she was coming down, she was bringing the hand down, trying to stab him, and that he was holding her off. He was fearful. I was afraid. I just lay there with her in my arms. And this is afterwards. I just lay there numb with Tina lying there on top of me. He goes through a lot of that evidence. It's kind of, he's asked a number of times, like, to kind of, to get to go exactly how it happened, and then again, he's asked what next. And he talks about, I laid her out straight, and then he went out to the post office to Dungarvan, and he came back, she was on the floor. And as he kind of said, genuinely, it was the worst day of my life. He said he was trying to explain, he was asked exactly where the body was, and he was saying, like, she was near the double doors. Her head was towards the street. He said he got out of the what he was calling previously the dirty clothes. He got dressed as normal. He was asked, where did he put them? He said he put them in the bath, and he was asked, are they still there? And he says, no, they're well gone, Dave, to the officer. And he's talked about it was a sense of not being real. He says, I don't know the terms. I don't know how to put it. he says, you know, it's happened, but there's a part of you saying that that's not reality. I'm not a monster. It all happened so fast. And then talking about, as he said, we're talking about kind of the stories that he was giving, or the statements he was giving to the guards and the account to the media. He says the worst of all was, says, once the lie started, I couldn't stop. But he said, he I suppose, veers off every so often to talk about how much he loved Tina, and that was always about Tina. And he was talking about he can't, he's still in a disbelieving way. He couldn't believe what he had done, and had wanted to come back from Dundarvin so he could talk to her and to find her back there the way she was. And he says, even last night, even last night, Tina came to my dreams. I never wished her harm. And he said, and then, he was talking again about her face seemed to be distorted, and she came at him, and he said, I don't know how to describe it. It would frighten anybody. And then he said, I don't know how to describe he feels today, referring to the day where he's actually been arrested. And he says there's a sense of relief when it's out. And the officer then is again, can we go back to, so she was on top of you? And he says, yeah, her face was distorted. That's what I was seeing. He says, after it looked like she was asleep. When I picked her up, it was like she was breathing. He says, I don't know if you can understand this. So, he's putting across that he's in a kind of a confused sort of state. Mm-hmm. And he goes on, later in the interview, he talks about kind of acting automatically or in a robotic state, that he can't mention details. He talks about, you remember they were talking about the CPC, the professional competency certificate that he was doing for a truck driver. And
yes.
He says, you told me I did this. He says, I have no memory of that. And he said, and I can't give you details because I don't know if it's true. He says he just doesn't remember, because he was in this kind of, I suppose, heightened state of, being, as he called it, like he couldn't believe it was real. So he somehow divorced from the reality of what he's done. And he said, he hates himself, and he says he don't know how many times I nearly walked out of the pier, and he says but what stopped me was for the dogs. And he said he did lie about that part of it. He said if she had left, she would have taken the dogs. He says they were like children to her, and he says they were like children to me, the only children I ever had. So, and he remembers, he talks briefly then in this interview about how the previous November he came home to find Heidi dead, and the effect that had on him. And, how close he was to Heidi, and, as opposed to Ruby, the other dog was Tina's. And so the interviewer then is
he trying to get him back to the facts of what has happened here?
Yeah, and he's trying to get him back. He says, okay, back to the house, and he says, how did she look? And he says, I can't describe it. And how do you know she wasn't alive? And he says, well, she wasn't breathing. Now, it's not as condensed as that in the actual interview. This is the way I've kind of, I suppose, taken notes of it. And he says, did you call anyone? He says, no, why? And he says, shame. I could never describe the shame I've walked around with inside. It never goes away. And he said, like, you said you were sitting there and you were holding her and kissing, he was kissing her head. And he says, how long were you there for? He says, I don't know. He says, but when I held her, it was like the 17-year-old girl I had met nearly 20 years before. And he says, I know you're sitting there thinking I'm a crazy bastard, but he says, I can't tell you how long I was holding her. It was so fast. It was like the blink of an eye. It was the only time I defended myself truly against her. And he was asked then, like, what caused it to fly off the handle and go at him with the chisel? And he just says, I don't know. It happened so fast. He says, I can't tell you if her neck was broken or she was strangulated. And he said he spent the whole night sitting on the floor downstairs holding her. And he woke up, or the next morning, he had no feeling in his backside, no feeling in his back. He said he laid her on the couch, and then after that, it's all a complete blur. And this is including, going to Ballincollig for this driving course. And he said then, it was sometime in the afternoon, he put her in the freezer because the dogs kept coming over to her. It was a chest freezer. Actually, he thinks it was on the Wednesday night. He's not sure. It was so long ago. And this is where he talks about he was working on automatic. He was like a robot, and his brain wasn't working. And he said that she was so heavy, it was like a 10-ton bag of coal. And but she just slipped in, and she just slipped into the freezer. And he said he wanted to try and forget, but the dogs kept reminding him. And there was a number of times he felt like committing suicide. And there's times done when he felt like walking into the police station or the Garda station and saying, lads, this is what happened. And he talks about then that the day when he's now in custody on the 12th of October 2023, he said, look, today I took a walk around. Yeah, I know I was being followed. He said, I sat in places we had sat and walked in places where we had walked. And I knew I knew what was going to happen. He says, I was sick of being targeted, and he says, I wanted to be arrested in Youghal. So he was, I guess, saying that he was sticking around to face the music at this stage. He was asked then to go back, tell us about the freezer, what size it was, and he was saying, look, it's a middle-sized one. He doesn't know what they were called. He said they'd never plugged it in, and it was too big for anywhere that they had in the house.
This was obviously the first the Garda had heard of the freezer, because the freezer was well gone by the time they did this search. The freezer, I think we heard earlier in the trial, he had tried to give it away on Dundeel in the aftermath and said it needed a clean, but that it was in good working order. We don't know what came of the freezer, but nonetheless, he is the one who's introduced this freezer into the evidence, which becomes the state's case.
Yeah.
Because in their opening, they said they believed she was kept in this freezer for 2 days before he then buried her under the stairs.
Yeah, and he kind of says he thinks that he buried her, because he says he's not sure, because he was in this kind of robotic state, that he thinks he buried her. He did it on the Sunday, the 26th of March, which is
a week.
I suppose it's a week later, or 6 days or 5.5 days later, depending on the time. And like he said at one point, like he was asked when did he start. He said it was dark when he started and it was dark when he finished. So he was at it all day. And he was asked then, like, he was talking about, like, how did he do it? And he says, it's been killing me since I did this. He dug it out. There were so many stones that there was a broken spade. He said there was a lot of sandy soil. He says he wasn't sure how to describe that. And he says, you might think it was funny, but I didn't want to dirty her. So I wrapped her in plastic. And he says, and before I covered her, I wanted to get roses, but I couldn't. And he said, you've no idea, nothing I can ever say will make it right. And he talks about...
so he buried her on Mother's Day?
Yeah, it looks like it, yeah. And, again, he's just, he's kind of repeating kind of, it's a confession, but again, he's not able to give exact details. Mm-hmm. He says, I can't take it back. I can never put into words what happened. She just flew at me. I should have just let her end me. And then he explains, look, the cement was there because we had it anyway because they're doing up the house. And he says everything was in the house.
So he dug out all this sort of sand and soil from underneath the stairs, underneath the stairs. So there was, most stairs will have like a panel or something, and some stairs will have a hollow behind them or whatever. So he presumably tore down what was there and then dug down.
No, there was actually, there was this cubbyhole which you get access and it'll go right under the stairs, and there was a kind of a red brick feature wall, so to speak, that was kind of sealing up the side of it. And that, he said that was there when he was digging it out. So it was a kind of a small space. He said his knuckles were bleeding a whole lot when he got into it. And there was a struggle obviously to get down, even though the soil was relatively soft. And he said that wall was there, before Tina died. It wasn't built afterwards, along with the concrete that he poured onto the grave that he made. But he's brought back into, like, exactly, what did you do then? And, so he brought her into the kitchen, he laid her down. And he mentioned that he had a dress that she'd always wanted to wear that never got it, with roses on, but we didn't get to hear what happened actually with that. And he said he kind of wanted to kind of give her a funeral or a burial. He described himself as a fucking idiot. And he again, he was kind of talking about how everything kind of went through this automatically, and refers to himself as being stupid, and talks about going around the shops and eventually getting the roses from Tesco.
What's happening, just to switch it for a minute, if you can, or does that work with your notes? Is that causing you a problem? Because what I was just wondering was, at this point, what's happening in the house? Her body's already been removed, and she's gone for post-mortem. Yeah,
so the parallel side of this story now is that the body was removed, like I said, I think about 20 to 3.
Yeah.
So he's in custody around the same time, and he's in this interview. So I mean, it's 6 hours, so it's probably the same time or slightly earlier even. And in the meantime, like, we hear about the body when it's recovered is face down. There's pretty gruesome evidence. We can go into that a bit. So we're getting this from the evidence of Laureen Buckley. And she was kind of like, she was talking about she arrived at 11 o'clock on the day that he was arrested, 12th of October. He was arrested at just after 12. So the bone expert is there with the assistant state pathologist an hour before he's arrested. And we know that there's already been human remains found, but they haven't been identified or anything. So
we know at this point that when they arrived that they've got as far as a sort of what they believe to be a hand coming out from the area that they believe that she's buried. And they believe that for a number of reasons, because of the cadaver dogs, because they've been sort of told that it's a likely place, and that because the concrete on the wall is two different types, basically, one of the Gardaí has noticed that there's some work gone on in this place. So they arrive, and the proper excavation work, no doubt, begins.
So as I mentioned, so Dr. Buckley kind of, I suppose, rows in with the forensic archaeologists, and they go to work kind of doing the whole removing layer by layer so that any evidence that might turn up isn't lost. So the fact that the plastic sheet was under Tina Satchwell's body and wrapped around made it relatively easy, as it was put, to kind of lift it out and place into the body bag. In the meantime, the builders who were contracted to help the guards in this have removed this little red brick wall. So the archaeologists and this team of forensic experts have much better access than he had when he was digging the grave in the first place. So she describes like how the body was face down. Her lower legs were back over, so they were kind of, her knees were bent. One hand, one arm was kind of up, pressed against her chest, and the other was down by her side. And there was a kind of, again, dimension of this concrete slab that was placed over where the head area would have been. And they started the post-mortem, I suppose, that afternoon when he's in custody, and she talks about, they're removing the large sheet. This blanket was referred to yesterday that was wrapped around Tina as well. So this is inside the black plastic sheeting that he used, which incidentally he said came from their car boot sales, which they used to lay out on the ground to show what they were selling for. And she talks about, so Dr. Buckley then talks about some of the leg bones could be seen protruding through the sheet. There was a dressing gown on the body. She, again, like I said, she described kind of the body position it was in. And she said it was more preserved on the front because it was face down. And it was much better preserved to the rest. The back was more decomposed, especially the back of the neck. The head was skeletal with hair, vertebrae had become detached. There was joints and various bones had become loose as a result of the kind of deterioration.
It's fairly gruesome evidence, isn't it?
It is, and this is paraphrased because she was giving a lot of medical terms. She was using all the kind of very precise academic terms. So she was being asked to explain this by the Council for State to just say exactly what that was, and so this is the version I'm giving you, is the simplified version, and she would have washed some of the bones like that had become detached, including the mandible, the lower jawbone, and things like that, and there were some ribs that had become detached, and some of the small bones from the toes were missing, which she says is very common, that they're probably simply dissolved into the soil at this stage. And she was able to do a biological profile from what she got and say that was an estimate. She was 5'5". And from the degradation of the bones in the neck and vertebrae, she could tell her age that this person was 45 years old. And there was no evidence of any other injuries or there was no evidence of any fractures on any bones, including the skull. And then, through cross-examination, we got kind of more of this, it kind of how it all worked. It kind of brought through it. And one of the ways that she was able to identify that the body was female was just the features of the skull were all female. And again, she was talking about, like there's some areas of the bone there's some areas of the body where bones can show that there were specific injuries. And one of them was the hyoid bone, which is a small bone. It's just under the tongue, but it's not connected to the skull. It's held in place by ligaments. And, she was asked, will this show sign of, strangulation? And he says, in some cases it can do, but not in all. And in this case, it was completely intact. So there was no sign of any kind of damage to that. So that was kind of...
So the postmortem basically was showing that they had the body, that, the dental records would later state that this was Tina Satchwell, but it didn't give up a cause of death.
No. And this is where we are now with the interview that's going on. Like, as the guard trying to demonstrate, or he's trying to understand what Richard Satchwell is telling him. So David Noonan is lying on the floor with his arms in the air, asking him, so it was like this, and asking him to hold a belt and trying to show, the motion of the stabbing, that Tina was trying to get at him with the chisel. And so, and again, he's kind of, Richard is just kind of saying it's all happening too fast, and it's kind of hard to put details on it. And when he continues, they continue into the whole kind of how he kind of dug the grave, and again, he was, as he said, he was trying not to be. He said I wasn't disrespectful, and he remembered the bunches of flowers he put on, and. He said he sat there and he was there for hours and hours, and he didn't know how long he was there. And he said he heard one of the dogs bark, and eventually, that brought him out of that kind of, trance
or
whatever you want to call it. And as and he says, I still talk to her, I still dream of her, I dream of the nice Tina. And he says, I knew people knew that side, but I never wanted the public to see that side. And he was asked how long did it take to dig the hole, and I've already explained that one. He said from dawn to dusk. And, it's kind of coming to an end. The custody sergeant, I think, was in at some stage that came in to tell him that his time was extended. So the interview continues. And at one point, he said he used to open the door. There was a kind of a back door to the house that was since plastered over. That sometimes he'd stand there and he'd talk to her. And on one occasion, he said, I sat down inside to tell her about what he'd seen when he was driving on the motorway, like the giant violin, which wasn't said in Cork, but we know is in Longford. And again, it's back to
And he's talking about in the kind of the weeks and months and years, presumably after this, that he's
and he's going back, and the Garda interview was trying to get him back to the 20th of March in 2017. And he's kind of saying, well, what do you do with the leftover soil? The leftover soil, and he said, I dumped it bit by bit, and this is how sick I am. There's a new house being built right next to our special spot. I just tipped it out there, and I used the same bag over and over again. He said nothing was planned, and he was asked to clarify this at one stage. He said, how'd you do that? He says, well, I went up in the car, and I think kind of it finished off then really the interview. And it finished the evidence to date. He was just asked to do a quick sketch of the downstairs area, and he signed that. And again, the jury were given a copy of this to go through.
So when he was dumping the soil that he had dug out from under the stairs to bury his wife, what he's saying is, and maybe he will go back over this again because this interview is obviously going to get more detail, but that he went to some other place. He doesn't detail where this was, with a bag of time, and empties out this.
They had this special place that the two of them used to go and walk to, and they used to, I think, enjoy. I think it's on the water or near a lighthouse
in Youghal.
Yeah, and they refer to it. I think after he came back from Dungarvan, before he went back to his house with dead Tina Satchwell lying inside, he went to the same place. And this they had from the phone records, if you remember, when they went through all that. And in one of the interviews with him, they're explaining, we can see where you've been and all the rest. And he was accepting, that's where I was.
Right.
And one of them was a kind of 40 minutes where he was sitting in this area. And it was the same area where they put some of Pearl, the parrot's food in that area because they didn't have Pearl's body, because an autopsy was done and the vet did the cremation on that one.
So instead he went there and he sort of bit by bit put this soil there, got rid of it from the house.
And obviously it was a building site, so it wasn't particularly noticeable.
It's pretty gruesome, the evidence on that, what he's done, and that, how long her body was there in the house and then in the freezer, and then how he buries it he buries her body under the stairs and then continues to live in the house.
Yeah, and he talked. There's a little bit about I think he found it a bit of a struggle, even though the forensic anthropologist talks about the grave was much bigger than the body. The body certainly didn't fill it. That he did have difficulty placing her in it. And I think part of that was the confines he was working in, and I suppose.
Well, the body must have gone into rigor mortis, I imagine.
We didn't hear that in court, so we don't know that. And he was kind of. He wasn't able to, he was asked, were you able to lie her down fully? And he says, no, I wasn't. And he said it was difficult then trying to bury the plastic because of the way it was bent. And he was asked, what else did you put in the hole? And he says, well, I didn't put any mementos or pictures or anything like that, just flowers. And he said he put a wedding ring into the pocket of the robe as well, which was her second wedding ring, because there was previously evidence we heard that she had given her wedding ring to her grandmother, who was being laid to rest, because she had never had one.
And we also heard that there was a wallet. Her purse was in the pocket of the robe.
Yeah, that was from yesterday's evidence from one of the forensic guards who talked about. She was there, kind of, I suppose, bagging the evidential exhibits, you know. And one of these was this purse, and there was all her social services card and a Boots reward card and extra vision card and all this in her name. So, you know, it was obviously, it's all adding to the identification of Tina Satchwell. And the dental records then would have been like he was at the same the dental expert or the dentist was there at the same time as Lauren Buckley as well, and Margaret Bolster as well. So, and they obviously had her dentist's records on hand, and were able to do the comparisons, and that was done. That was done, I think, to enable an official death cert to be kind of issued for Tina Satchwell, which was done on October the 13th. But I mean, apart from that, I don't think there was any doubt who they had at this stage.
Now, his body language was particularly different, you say, even from the two interviews over a course nearly of 24 hours. He's, in the earlier interviews, sticking to his story, sitting cross-armed. And then as he changes this story to tell how he did kill his wife, he is buried his hands between his legs.
Well, he's clasping them between his knees, and he's leaning forward as opposed to, you know, with his arms crossed, leaning back in the chair. And, you know, I'm not making a particular interpretation of that, but there was a change in body language.
And what about that in the real world, and is the real Richard Satchwell sitting before you in the court? Does he remain the same? He kind of, from where the jury can see him, like, he usually has his head in one hand, and at points today he had his both hands in his head, like he's a ledge, you know, to put whatever, you know, there's a ledge there where he can put his elbows on, so he's leaning forward on that, and he's sort of burying his head in his hands, so you can't see his face. So the video interview then will continue tomorrow?
No, that was finished today.
That was totally finished?
Yeah, that was finished today.
Is that them done with?
And no, because they do refer, like in the opening statement, that there was a series of interviews, and they also talk about there was more witnesses as well to come.
Right. So they haven't finished. They've finished questioning him for the moment for the purpose of that tape, but there will be further. On
this one, but but he's still in custody at this stage, and the jury would have seen, they would have seen that there is going to be more interviews to come, and that was all part of the opening statement.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Eamon.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.